Hello and welcome. 50 years ago, June 1970, I was 3. But there was actually something more important that happened on my 3rd birthday. 2 cars came to market. They both had their press launches in June 1973. The first one out of the blocks was the Triumph Staaag. The second one, slightly later on, not much later though, in fact the anniversary was just last Wednesday, was the Range Rover Classic. So in today's beer and bollocks session, I'm going to be talking about that. Now, this isn't going to be a history lesson. There's plenty of information out there on the web and so forth, plenty of misinformation as well. What I really wanted to talk about is a little bit of background behind Range Rover Classic and Triumph Staaag launch, how closely aligned they were, and why it is that I've kind of got myself lumbered with one of each. I actually got lumbered with more than one Range Rover. So development on those 2 cars both started under separate companies in around 1966 or thereabouts. Both had their launch dates delayed a number of times, partly due to issues being identified, but mainly due to industrial action. It wasn't a great time really for our industry in this country. Management and workers bickering and the unions mediating. And yeah, I'm not going to go there. This isn't a political channel. Anyway, so 2 cars launched. Neither car really had a captive market at that particular time. I know the whatever it was, the American Wrangler, the Cherokee, not Cherokee, the Wagoneer. Wagoneer, I quite like it. 1960s, was it Wagoneer? I don't know. America's had, I guess, station wagons that existed. But so did Land Rover. Land Rover had the 109 station wagon, Series 2A, existed in 1970. And while it could cart a number of people on a gun shoot or whatever, it wasn't a particularly luxurious vehicle. So Range Rover was really there because there was a gap in the marketplace which was seen as being needed for a luxury SUV. Before SUV even existed as a term, a luxury off-roader. And Staaag similarly was about having a luxury GT. And on paper, both cars should have beaten the world, but only one did. You know which one, I know which one as well. So poor old Triumph, the snag, the 7-year itch, I don't know, whatever, it woefully underperformed as far as its sales figures, projections and so forth were concerned. And the issues that the car had are largely, they're well documented. Sorry, my phone just went bidink. Well documented. I'm not going to go into those here. There'll be other videos where I do on the Triumph Staaag about the various maladies and problems that it had during its production, or during its development, which ran on into production. Paradoxically, the Range Rover needed absolutely bugger all doing with it and ran pretty much in the same format for the next decade, and allowed money to be swept through the door to allow the rest of the company really to survive. I know it ran into a brick wall in 74 and Jaguar had to be rescued and all this. It's a long and complex story, the 1970s at British Leyland. Yeah, it was British Leyland then, wasn't it? It wasn't BMC because that was 60s, I think. So what did I know about them during the 70s? Because I was growing up in the 70s. Long, hot summers. Every single summer was amazing. Blue skies, school holidays just lasted forever. Wagon wheels were this big. All this reminiscing isn't getting us anywhere though, really, is it? Because, you know, it's the 1970s, and unless you were born in the 60s and you remember the 1970s, it's difficult to explain it. I'm sure if you were born in the 70s and you remember the 80s, you'll have similar kind of recollections about how glorious the 80s were. Personally, I think the 80s was shite. 90s even more so. But 1970s, the year of Draylon, sorry, the decade of Draylon, lurid colour schemes for cars. Ah, yes. It was good. It was a great time. Flares. I don't wear flares. But I remember seeing Range Rovers on the telly. I remember seeing Range Rovers being used by the police. Two-door Range Rovers on the motorways. We lived in Gloucester then. But I just remember seeing them. I remember thinking, that is a magnificent looking car. I didn't know much about it. I wasn't really interested in cars then. More interested in tearing Meccano sets and stuff apart. But I remember seeing them. I remember seeing Range Rovers. Now, I don't remember seeing Staags that much around then. I mean, they were on the telly, but I don't recall seeing them. I certainly wouldn't have been impressed, had I seen a rerun of Diamonds Are Forever, the James Bond film. Because for some reason, they overdubbed the gorgeous Triumph V8 sound with what I can only assume was a 4-cylinder Triumph Herald. So you wouldn't have been impressed by that, really, would you? With the farting exhaust and everything. But I don't remember it. I don't remember Staags at all. My first memory of a Stag, well, I was of drinking age, and I used to drink in a pub in Epsom, and the landlord there had a Stag. And it was always parked outside the pub, and I remember sitting out in the pub, consuming enormous amounts of ale. Light and bitter I used to drink in those days. Funny chap I used to be. Funny chap I am now. But anyway, remember I used to sit outside the pub and look at this Stag. Oh, it's a gorgeous looking thing. Oh, it's got a V8. It's got a V8. I mean, that thing is so gorgeous. I'm going to have me one of those one day. And I was driving around in my Ford Anglia, 105E Anglia at the time. And I think I actually just got down to the day. One day, I got a job. I was working for the bank. As you know, I was working for the Midland Bank. Who were they? They were swallowed up by HSBC. But long after I left, I was working for the Midland Bank, and I got a couple of paychecks in. And when I got to 18 or 19, they said, "Oh, why don't you have a personal loan?" As they used to in those days. And I thought, fuck it, what can I spend this money on? What can I spend this money on? It's going to burn a hole in my pocket. I know. I'm going to buy the cheapest Triumph Stag I can possibly get hold of. Not the one I've got now. And at the time, I mean, we're talking mid-1980s, 85, 86. So back then, you were limited to Exchange and Mar, Stag Owners Club, and I joined those at Bromley Pageant of Motoring in 85? Might have been 85. I was there with my Anglia. So I joined the Stag Owners Club, and I found the car, my first Stag, I found that through the pages of the Stag Owners Club magazine. And it was quite local to me as well. I think it was back end of Sutton, just off the A217, Brighton Road. And we went down to go and have a look at it. And it was a non-original shade of blue. Oddly enough, this one was as well. But this one was like a metallic blue, and I saw it and I thought, fucking hell, I've got to have this car. I didn't have the insurance, so I couldn't test drive it, but my mate, Stuart, I think you drove it. And we drove it down the A217 and back, and I think I paid £3,000 for it. Now, I might be completely wrong there, but that was a lot of money to me then. Considering my salary, monthly salary, was somewhere around 700 quid. My mother took a large chunk of that for tax for living at home, which was fair enough at the time it happened. I wasn't bitter about it at all. No, so I bought the Stag. Anyway, so I got the loan sorted out, went back, following week, picked the car up, had it all insured, and drove it home, and my mum went berserk. It's quite a common theme, this, isn't it? I think she thought I was being frivolous with my money, because when she was 19 or so, she was saving long and hard, really, to raise money for her first house, this, that and the other, looking to get married before she was 22, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. As happened then. And I was more interested in just having a shitload of fun. So my Stag, loved that car. I still remember music I would play on the bloody Blaupunkt stereo that was in it with the, it was a nice car. It was a nail, but it was a nice car. I liked it. I loved it. I drove that car everywhere for the 2 years I owned it. So that was my first Stag. And what was wrong with it? Why was it a nail? Well, the more I looked at it, the more I realised there were little problems with it here and there and everywhere. So first and foremost, it did about 200 miles to a sump load of oil. It would get through about 4 litres of oil in 200 miles. It was a proper Mark 1 Stag. This is way before free road tax was introduced in the UK, so there was no real ringing of cars, although there's, I'm sure stolen Stags existed out there. It didn't have a hardtop, so I rushed out and bought a hardtop from, and I think it was the Stag Man in Lewisham. You guys out there, you Stag chaps, will know. And he had a Rover V8 engine Stag pickup outside the front of his shop, if I remember rightly. And yeah, pretty clear about that. It had a big supercharger on the top of it. Lurid. Great fun. I should imagine it was a bastard on the handling front though. But I used that car quite a lot, and it was fabulous. It broke down a lot. And I had issues with it. But it was a lovely car. I had to sell it. I sold it along with all my other cars to buy my house in Wilmslow in Cheshire when I moved up north. It were a cracking time up there, I tell you. Really enjoyed myself. So I sold the first Stag, and I was a bit sad to see it go. It was the nicest car I'd owned at that point. I'd had P6s and Triumph 1500s and Ford Anglias, my company Cavalier, 1.6L Cavalier. But I still kind of hankered after a Range Rover, but there's no way could I afford the fuel consumption, the fuel on a Range Rover. I could only just afford it on a Stag. And a Stag driven carefully will do 25 to 30 miles to the gallon on a manual overdrive gearbox, which this one was. But Range Rovers, I mean, you're talking 12, 13 miles to the gallon. I mean, shit, you might as well have an XJS. So Range Rovers were put out of my mind, but I did like looking at them. And every now and then I would dawdle past a local Land Rover dealership and all of the classics were outside, looking at all of those. And of course Lovejoy came on the telly. Ian McShane with his Cuban heels. And I loved that show too. It was great fun. He was a roguish, if you've never seen it, look it up. He was a roguish antiques dealer in East Anglia. And he was very much friends with members of the gentry, who of course all drove around in Range Rovers. And of course then you end up with this roguish chap, probably with his dyed black hair and everything, all those bits and bobs, driving around in a Range Rover. It was an image that appealed to me. And it appealed to a lot of people. A lot of people like Lovejoy. Even now I can't say it was a terrible show. I'm sure it was a terrible show, and I'm sure there's people are already thinking about hitting the pause button, thinking, Lovejoy, that was a right bag of shite, that was. No, I enjoyed it. And Tinkerdill, and was it Tinkerdill? Tinkerdill. And Eric. Anyway, reminiscing about fucking Lovejoy now. But Range Rover was constantly in your face on the telly. You always saw it. Whenever there was a police camera action, drive like a cunt, you're going to drive like a bastard and you're going to get stopped. There was always a Range Rover, police Range Rover, with the bloody wheelie bin on the roof and, a couple of coppers sitting inside it. And I remember seeing a TV show about, I think it was the M62, and it was closed. Manchester to Leeds, it was closed because it's one of the highest motorways in the UK. Only because Scotland doesn't have that many motorways, because I'm sure theirs would be higher. Well, they're certainly further up on the map anyway. But they closed it, and then this Range Rover, police Range Rover, was just trawling up and down. And I was just thinking, look at that magnificent beast. Just the truck, nothing can move, and this Range Rover is just driving through that snow. I've got to get me one. And that would have been early 1990s, late 1980s. No chance, not having one yet. Stag. Still didn't really see too much of them. I know Hazel was a TV detective chap, and he had one, but they never really stood out to me. It was the chap outside the pub, the landlord of the Jolly Coopers in Epsom, that had one. And that's where the Stag I suppose because I enjoyed an ale or two, and I just sat there looking at this car all day long thinking, that thing's fucking gorgeous. I've got to get me one of them. And I think that's where the Stag infatuation came from. The Range Rover infatuation was much deeper much more in my subconscious. I mean, first of all, they sold a damn sight more than they sold stags. And 27,000 stags sold across 7 years. It wasn't a great production run, it really wasn't. Poor Stag. And it should have beaten the world. It should have shown Mercedes how to do the Bobby Ewing Merc SL. It really should have done it. It should have absolutely wiped the floor clean with Mercedes. And it didn't. And it's probably got to be one of the biggest regrets of British Leyland as a company. They had something that could beat the world. All they had to do was put it together properly. Not rely on the customers to actually do their R&D for them. But again, borderline, we're in danger of getting a bit political here, and I don't do that. Anyway, so the Stag, as I say, wasn't really in my subconscious until I saw one, and then I had to get it. And I now I'm darting between Range Rovers and Stags here, but my channel, my rules. So I got that blue Stag, and like I said, I sold it. It drank a lot of oil. It had a couple of issues with it. It went like stink, and it sounded gorgeous. Oh, it sounded gorgeous. I loved it, absolutely adored it. Sold it, and it was a few weeks after I sold it. I went back to the trader I sold it to in Hamforth in Cheshire, and I genuinely thought that car was okay. I knew that there was a problem with one of the outriggers, and I had told him. It seemed to be fashioned entirely from Villa, one of the outriggers on the front, just underneath the front footwell. But otherwise, it was a bit tatty in the engine bay, but it ran and it sounded good. Anyway, he didn't give me a huge amount of money for it, as was the market at the time. And this is before the great 1990 property crash. So I sold it before then. I probably sold it as high as I possibly could have sold it, price-wise. So he told me it had a leaking fuel tank which he had to replace. So we knocked a bit of money off for that, and we agreed, blah, 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 blah. And I got the money I needed, and that was my deposit for the house, along with all the other cars I sold. But the other cars I sold for buttons, by comparison to the Stag. Probably didn't sell it for as much as I paid for it. Anyway, I've never been really good at that. It's probably not a good thing to say then, was it? And then I kept seeing it around and about, and I kept popping in, because this chap, he had all sorts of really interesting stuff in his showroom. He had Jensen Interceptor. And I went in there, I was looking around the Jensen Interceptor, and he said, that Stag? I said, what Stag? He said, the Stag you sold me. And I said, the Stag you bought off me? He said, yes. I said, what about it? He goes, oh, I've had it back, because it's had a problem with blah, blah, blah. I said, oh, crap. So he's bought a cheap Stag, and he's moaning about every single thing that's going wrong with it now. But he wasn't. He was a gentleman. The last I saw of that car, it had clearly had a rear suspension failure, and it was on the A34 heading south, just south of Stockport, I would imagine. And I was driving into Manchester, and I saw it sat at the side of the road with its back wheels like that. Diff nose had snapped. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I know, the symptoms. And when the diff nose snaps, if you look back through my channel, you'll see the Stag I was doing for a customer, diff nose and differential problems that he had. And that diff nose was about to snap. It's cracked all the way around the edge. And that's the last I saw of that car. No longer registered, off the DVLA database. Bit sad, really. Trouble is, if I still had it, I'd have poured, it would have been a money pit, I'd have poured shitloads of money into it, because I've got this terrible habit of not selling cars, of hanging on to them, because I kind of fall for them. Anyway, so that was the first Stag. Then I got my second Stag, the white one I've still got, and I got that I saw that, so I was down the pub. If anyone knows the kind of the Yule Surrey area, Tolworth Surrey area, the Hogsmill Tavern. I think it was a beefeater then, probably still is now. Hogsmill Tavern, I used to drink in there regularly. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday lunchtime every week. An enormous amount. Probably me and the lads I drank with, we probably kept that pub in, afloat. If we didn't happen to go to that pub one Friday night, I'd imagine the breweries were in blind panic. Oh, we've oversupplied. Hangovers were tremendous. tremendous as in horrific, not tremendous as in great. And I've got some great stories about getting pissed as well. But maybe for another beer and bollocks session, because we're talking about stags now. Anyway, there was one of the chaps I drank with, Lloyd. And really, yeah, he's a nice solid bloke. And he lived about 3 or 4 doors down from the pub. And he was selling his stag. And he was selling it to buy a house. And I think, what a fucking paradox this is. This is actually meant to happen. This is supposed to be, this is where it all happens. Because I sold my stag to buy a house, lost my bloody shirt on it, still got the fucking house. And it's not worth a fraction of what the mortgage is worth. Because of the property crash 1990, you keeping up? And I thought, this is mine, this has got to happen. So more or less said to him, I'll have it. Oh, crikey, he said, absolutely euphoric. Oh shit, what have I fucking done? I bought a car blind in a pub while pissed. But I knew him. I knew Lloyd. Was Lloyd? Sure it was. Anyway, so next morning, woke up with a thundering hangover. Oh, fucking hell, just can't cope with it. I'm going to give up beer again. I said it every single Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning. I'm giving up beer. I'm never drinking again. Until the next day, of course. That's what Sunday lunchtime was about, was to get rid of the bloody hangover. Anyway, it was a Saturday morning, and my mate Tim gave me a tinkle, and he said, you remembered you were going to buy Lloyd's car off him? So, oh shit, I do remember that. So fuck it. So I walked over there to go and have a look at it, and it was in his garage. Insert photograph here of the stag in the garage as I saw it. Doesn't look bad, does it? Looks all right now. So Lloyd had it for a fair few years. He bought it off another one of the guys in the drinking group. And he'd done quite a lot of work, or had quite a lot of work done on the bodywork, but done nothing mechanically, but he'd had paint sourced out was the primary thing. Odds and sods done here and there and everywhere, but the main thing was it was painted. It was covered in paint dust. And it was largely assembled, although it was very, very loosely assembled. And I said, well, does it go? And he started it up, and it sounded, crikey, that sounds a bit beefy. Sounds nice. It's got a stainless exhaust on it. Still got the same stainless exhaust on it 26 years later. It was April when I bought it. April 1994. Tuesday, about tea time. Monty Python fans. So for some inexplicable reason, I drove it from Lloyd's house, the 2 streets back to my house to test drive it. No brakes. Well, it did have brakes. They were all attached, but they weren't really doing anything. Got it back to my house and into the driveway. Unfortunately, my mother was out, but my father was in. And he was, oh, what's that? And I said, well, Lloyd's selling it. And, you know, I sort of said to him, I'd buy it. And my dad, being an absolute superstar he is, I'll give you half the money, he said. Shit the bed. I mean, how can you turn down an offer like that? How? How can you turn down an offer? But it was done on one proviso, that I didn't work on it. I was not allowed to do any engine work because he was absolutely sick to death of my mum haranguing him about oil stains on the driveway, oily handprints all over every single light switch, door shut face, door handle, telephone in the house. And I wasn't even living there then. I was living in Amersham. I don't quite know how it all happened really. I used to go home from Amersham. So I used to go from Amersham, which was my home at the time, back to my parents' home in Ewell to get pissed with my mates, my old chums, in the Hogswell Tavern. And that's how it all happened really. Anyway, so we cleared the garage out and hid it in there. My dad was going to break the news to my mother. But I said to him, yeah, absolutely, I will not work on the engine. That's how it's going to happen. I think Mum was actually quite pleased that I got it. Well, she wasn't pleased I got it, but she quite liked it. It was white, and she liked white cars. It's like yellow cars too, and day-glow orange cars. So anyway, over the following weeks, I got round to replacing calipers, sorting out all the bits and bobs that weren't the engine, getting all the electrics sorted out, tidying up all of the bits and bobs, tightening all the bolts up that weren't quite tight. I then delivered it to a chap in Wimbledon, and I can't remember him now. He's not there anymore. I know he's not there anymore, but delivered it to him and said, right, timing chains please, and MOT it. £900 later. £900 later. All he did was the timing change and an MOT. Anyway, I got the car back. Initial driving impressions. This is fucking terrible. What a nail! Oh my god, it was awful. It was absolutely terrible. But I didn't have anywhere to store it where I was living in Amersham. I didn't have a garage there. And I was on a waiting list to get one of the garages around the back of the flats where I lived. So in the meantime, it had to stay in my parents' garage, which I'm sure would have irritated my mum. But she didn't actually really say anything to me too much. You know, if I wanted a stag in my garage, I'd own a stag, kind of, you know. But at least she got to see me, and every time I did turn up at home, I did cut the grass. Not that kind of grass. I used to get the lawnmower out, by which time it was a crappy rotary lawnmower, not a Suffolk Colt, and cut the grass in a third of an acre back garden. So I guess that was payment really for leaving a car in their garage, dripping oil onto the ground. Anyway, I realised that most of the reason why it drove like crap, because first of all the engine needed a damn good service, which I did, without making a huge mess. All the suspension was shot, so I rebushed the suspension, repainted, did odds and sods around the front end of the car, but didn't do the back end of the car. And it drove a little bit better after that. Then I met my missus, 1995. 25 years, on the 10th of June this year. 25 years since I met her. I did pop home, I broke the COVID-19 rules and gave her a hug. Although I didn't actually, other than that, I socially distanced and buggered off back down to Devon the same day. So, I am following the fucking rules. Anyway, so I met the missus, and by which time the car was relocated up to Amersham where I lived. Interestingly enough, a week after I met my missus, 10th of June in 1995, I actually sold the house I owned in Manchester. So these things are all starting to go around in big old circles about now. I sold that house. And I only made after the 6 years of ownership, only made a £6,000 loss against the mortgage value. Of course, that place now is worth like 400,000 if I'd hung on to it. But then, I didn't have the money then. Anyway, bollocks. So I had the car in my... Did I have it in Amersham first, or did I actually... my girlfriend then, when I first met her, she was my girlfriend. There was an instant attraction. I'm not going to get all soppy on you, don't worry about that. You don't have to unsubscribe immediately. She had a nice big yard. This place we're still living in, oddly enough. And a carport at the side, and I said, oh, do you mind if I put my stag in your carport? And kicked her. Gorgeous. Mark II GTI Golf 8-valve, 2-door, black, thin bumper, perfect spec. I mean, that is the perfect spec for a Mark II Golf GTI. It really is. I know everyone says you've got to have the fat bumpers, you've got a 16 valve. Bollocks to it. You need 8 valves because it gives you much, much, much better drivability. And also, what's the point of having a car that can do 1 billion miles an hour when you can't go over 40? Thin bumpers because they look classier. Anyway, we're digressing on to Volkswagen Golf now. Anyway, so we stuck the Stag. No, I'll tell you what happened. It ended up in Amersham first. This is the beer, this is. Got a garage in Amersham. And it was quite useful because I could put the car in the garage and I could use it more regularly. And I've really started just working my way around the various issues the car had. it had an enormous thirst for power steering fluid, mainly because it was just leaking straight out of the rack. So I made the mistake twice of buying the cheapest rack I could, Recon rack, before I actually bought a half decent proper Recon rack. And there's a lesson in there somewhere. Buy cheap, buy 3 times. And it had an automatic gearbox at the time, which was all right, but it was incontinent, because they do. That BW35s, the Borg Warner 35 gearbox, has a habit of overflowing up the dipstick tube. Barroom boards will tell you all fucking day long it's not possible. They cannot do it. I'll tell you what, they fucking do. I've watched it do it. So it leaked its gearbox oil, but other than that, it was all right. I rebuilt the front suspension on it. I fixed the heater on it. I tidied up odds and sods around it, and it was a going concern. You know, it was a nice car to drive around, buzz around in. It had little issues, but it never really let me down. I have only ever once been recovered, had the, if you imagine your cat, when your cat like has a wound and it has the cone of shame, well, treat the RAC tow recovery truck as the, you know, the recovery truck of shame. Staag's only had it once, Range Rovers had it twice. So once the Staag had recovery of shame, and I'll go into cheap, nasty ignition modules in another video and the problems I've had with them. But no, pretty much every time I had a minor problem with that Staag, it would always get me home one way or the other. And I was living in Amersham and working in Basingstoke, which is about 50 miles each way, and I used the Staag for it. Why not? Shits and giggles. And then one day I started it up in the car park, and it went clack, 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 clack. Oh, fucking, what is that? That just sounds horrible. I'd had problems with the oil pressure on that, and I'll go through a whole video on oil pressure and Triumph Staags and the issues like that. But anyway, it was knocking like a, I don't know what. I can't even think of a metaphor for how badly it was knocking. But when you hear a death rattle, you will know a death rattle on an engine. And you just think, oh, shit. Fuckity, 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 fuck. So I limped it home really, really, really carefully. And the oil pressure was just dropping all the way. And it had been pretty terminal prior to that point anyway. Anyway, this is the point where my now fiance had her rather nice Mark II GTI Golf turfed out of its carport and into the yard, so I could put my Staag in the carport and lift the engine out. And I pulled the engine out, and me and a couple of mates actually, Gravel Truck Graham and Andy, gave me a hand, and we hauled the engine out and turned it over. And the idea was we were just going to undo all the big end caps, and we were going to put a new crank, new bearings in, new chains, hook it all back up again, and be away with it. 3 of the main bearing caps were broken in half. So there was only 2 main bearing caps holding the crankshaft into the engine block. Well, you know, sometimes when your heart sinks when you see something happening, that was one of those moments. Oh, bollocks. I actually quite like the car, and I just could not see how I was going to afford to sort this out. Anyway, I did, because it's still going. And then, so we got married. Look, we'll wind forward a fair bit. We'll stop yabbering on about Staags now. We'll start talking about Range Rovers. That's probably what you're in here to listen to anyway. So we got married. Marvellous wedding. Brilliant it was. In 97, July 97. Wasn't a shotgun job. My first son was born in November 98. You can do the maths. And it was fabulous. And by which time I was driving round because my wife couldn't put a car seat in and out of her Golf. So she took on my Mondeo. I had a 1.8 Mark 1 Mondeo M-Reg, so a year and a bit into production. So she took that and I got the Golf. And as I was driving the Golf around, I think this car's not been very well looked after, has it? And yeah, but I went back through. I had serviced it prior to that, but I went back through the history. And she kind of hadn't had anything done with it really at all. So it needed a damn good service. It needed a timing belt. It needed all the bushes replaced on the suspension. It needed shock absorbers. It needed half decent tyres. It didn't need lowering. It didn't need Lexus rear lights on it. It didn't need fat bumpers or tinted windows. It was a really nice original car. Anyway, nothing wrong with you dubbers. I got it driving really, really nicely, and that was a crazy car, that 8-valve Golf, because I used to drive into Greenford and back on a daily basis. So I used it to drive to Greenford, and when you wanted it to go, it fucking flew. It was outstanding. I always run it on Pirelli tyres, the Pirelli P whatever, I can't remember exactly what designation it was now, but Pirelli tyres, and it stuck to the road like shit to a blanket. And it was amazing. But then if you drove it carefully and had a stupid little onboard trip computer, it would tell you you're doing 49 miles to the gallon for long periods of time. And I know you can't trust the onboard computer. I know you need to take the average and brim to brim and measure the mileage, blah, 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 blah. But I was that car was so comfortable to drive around, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. Anyway, roll forwards a couple of years, and that's actually about a year and a half or so, driving this car around, I'm thinking, I'm actually going to lose my licence in this thing because it's so much fun. It is a hoot. I want another one. VW Golf Mark II, black, 3-door or 2-door with a tailgate, thin bumper, 8-valve. Don't give me the 16-valve shite. I don't need it. And at that point, for some reason, I don't know what triggered my subconscious, but I suddenly had this urge. There was an itch. I had to have a Range Rover. I've got to have a Range Rover in my life. I need it. I didn't want to be Ian McShane, a roguish antique dealer in East Anglia. I didn't want to be anything other than I just wanted a Range Rover. And I searched around discreetly, and eventually I found one. Oddly enough, he was the landlord at the pub my wife met me in a few years before. So the first time I ever met my wife, June the 10th, 1994, she came down to the Saracen's Head in Old Amersham on Wealdon Street. It was one of my regular haunts when I lived in Amersham. The landlord then was Raymond Blows. Not going to say it. Anyway, he moved on, and it was a few years later that it turned out that his successor, landlord in the pub, was selling a green Range Rover. Not the one I've got now. British Racing Green, K-Reg, K237DTU, dead, unfortunately. So I bought the first, so I went over and had a look at it. I thought, I love this car. This has presence. It was a Vogue model, had leather seats. It had, at the time I didn't know anything about them, I just wanted one. Had an MOT, and it looked shiny. And I know it's a terrible way to buy cars. Now I know an awful lot more about them. I probably would have rejected this one. But I bought it. And it's probably the best way to learn sometimes, is to buy the worst fucking example you can find and learn from your mistakes. Damn sight cheaper than buying the most expensive one and finding out it's a worse one dressed up as an expensive one. So at least I learned what the problems were with them. So I presented this idea to my wife then, that I had put a deposit down on a Range Rover. And we were sitting in a pub. We were sitting in the Balloon Pub in Great Missington. I can't remember the name of the pub now, but we were sitting in there having a meal. And her expression, she doesn't drink either. I drink. So she doesn't drink. I drink for the pair of us. Her kind of response, instant response was, "Who do you think you are, Baron fucking Rothschild?" No, it's all right, darling. I'm going to get it on LPG. It'll be cheap as chips to run. Don't worry, sweetheart. No, she was not happy. She wasn't happy largely because I was going to flog her 2-door GTI Golf that she bought, brand spanking new. And in hindsight, perhaps I shouldn't have done that. But I did, with her approval, although she wasn't very happy about it. And I got my first Range Rover. Wow, this is fun, this is. Guess what? It was a fucking nail. Quite high mileage. So I bought it. It was, I'll put the date below the year I bought it. It had done 140,000 miles when I bought it. And it was British Racing Green, which was not a standard colour, I found out afterwards. But then I found out also, because it had a DDU number plate, K237DDU, if you want to look it up. And it was an ex-Land Rover car. So whether it was someone important in Land Rover, or whether it was just part of their press fleet or what, I don't know. But at that time, for that particular car, it was a non-standard colour. And the colour was throughout the inside of the body shell and everything. So it wasn't like it had been blown over, although it had been blown over. It hadn't been blown over the whole, changed colour. And I've got a feeling that perhaps it was some sort of styling development thing or special order that someone said they wanted it in British Racing Green. Because that came out, when it came to the 25th anniversary in 1995, which is about 3 years after this car was built, they came out with the 25th anniversary cars, Range Rover Classic cars. And you could actually choose whatever colour. That was the first year, as I understand it, that you could have British Racing Green on a Range Rover Classic. Correct me if I'm wrong. I could be talking complete and utter bollocks here, but that's what this channel's about. Well, that's what this video's about. Beer and talking nonsense. Pardon me. So, why was it a nail? Well, the first thing that kind of packed up on it was the... it was all right, actually. I think the first thing I found out on this car was I found out about dropped cylinder liners. Well, and at that time, the internet was in its infancy, so there was a couple of forums, but there was no real mechanisms to go and seek information, like you might do from me. So there was no one to really ask about it. And one of the forums suggested, lob K-seal into it. So I lobbed K-seal into it, and it stopped losing water. I thought, oh, that's good news. Fantastic. I drove it like that for nearly 40,000 miles. But there were other issues with it. It blew its transfer box. It started chattering when it got nearer 170,000 miles. It started going chirruping. Like these birds chirrup all the fucking time in my ear rolls when I'm near the nest. So it started chirruping, and then it wasn't long after that the chain didn't snap. It just, because of the whip on the chain, because it was slack, it just sheared the output inside the transfer box. So if you've ever changed a transfer box, I've done 2 transfer boxes on Range Rover Classics now, both of them on my back under a car on a gravel driveway. Neither was any fun at all, and I vowed each time that I'd never do this again. What else happened to it? It was lots of different colours. So the lacquer started to lift in various places. The sills dissolved. The rear crossmember dissolved. All these are fairly standard Range Rover problems these days. But on a car that was barely 12 years old at the time, that was excessive. And you could just pull handfuls of the sill off. Anyway, it ended up with the... I got the heads off it in the end because the cooling system pressurisation came back. I had the heads off, did the head gaskets, put them back on with composite gaskets, but missed, because I didn't know what I was looking for, missed the telltale sign of the dropped cylinder liner. So I ended up buying the car I've got right now, and I searched long and hard to find the blue car, because I asked my wife, could I buy another Range Rover? She said, what do you want one of those for? You've already got one. And I explained to her the idea was I would take the green Range Rover apart, sell it in bits, keep the best bits for myself, and buy another Range Rover because it was cheaper than sorting the Range Rover out I've already got. And the logic behind that was I'm going to repaint it, cost me £2,000. It needs a new engine, £2,500. It's still got 173,000 miles on the clock. It needs new sills, new crossmember, new floors, new boot floor, new front inner wings. So by the time we've added all that up, I can buy another Range Rover Classic. This was a few years later, but a long time ago. I've had this car since, insert date here. And I figured that if I have a budget of £3,500, I could go and buy another car. And I'm already cheaper than fixing the original one up, and it will be better somehow. But I searched long and hard, and eventually I found the blue car, and it was a two-owner from new car. It wasn't the kind of the highest spec that I was looking for. I wanted a Vogue SE because I wanted air suspension and everything, but every car I looked at was just rotten. Absolutely fucking rotten. And they had MOTs somehow as well. Work it out. Anyway, so I found the blue car, and initially I discounted it because it wasn't really the right spec, and it was low miles, and sorry, it had low miles, but there was something wrong with the advert. So I called him up, and he's like, blah blah blah, his dad's car, blah 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 blah. And something actually triggered me to actually, after I'd looked at all these other shonky wrecks, and I must have looked at about 10 of these things, barely any of them had like one sill between them, and half a cross member between the lot of them. And this was back when I didn't really have the time to work on my own cars. I mean, I do now, because it's my job. But back then, I was running a job, I was helping my wife looking after a toddler, and now, by which time she was pregnant with my twins. So, you know, life was going to get really fucking busy very, very, very quickly. Serious. So I needed something that was together to start off with, and I really didn't want a rusty, shonky fucking Range Rover. Anyway, I eventually went round to go and have a look at this, the blue car I've got now, L95. And I went through the paperwork. Fuck me, it really has got 46,000 miles on it, hasn't it? And I went underneath, and yeah, okay, the body mounts and so forth. So first of all the body mount shields, the triangular plate that sits under the floor, they were all in place. The sills were all solid. You could see where the spot welder had been along the edge of the sill, inner and outer. And it was really fucking tidy. Really fucking tidy. It had a terrible blow on the near side exhaust manifold. I think that's what the problem was. That's what deterred me. Because it had a problem, and someone had decided to, probably in a vain attempt to try and get an MOT, had welded the downpipe to the manifold. Yeah, if you've ever done something like that, please unsubscribe. Because I had to destroy a manifold and a downpipe in order to, you know, fix the fucking bodge. And there was a couple of other odds and sods that wasn't quite right with it. But overall, it was a clean and tidy car with good paint. Oh, I didn't want a blue car. That's what it was. So I think that, yeah, the main objective, first of all, was that it was blue. And I really wasn't sure about a blue car. Now, of course, I wouldn't have anything other than a blue Range Rover, apart from a red one, or a gold one, or a white one, or a beige one, or a green one, or a blue one. But once I'd seen the car, oh, the other thing it had absolutely weapons-grade terminal bump steer. Have you ever had it on a Range Rover, where you go over a strand of cotton lying across the road at 52 miles an hour, and the steering starts to vibrate really violently? It had that. And I knew about it. The seller had told me it's got really, really bad, yeah, bump steer. Crikey. He wasn't joking. Underneath 52 miles an hour, it was fine. No problems at all. So I bought it. What's the worst that could possibly happen? Anyway, I ended up scrapping the green car, took it all apart. I've still got some of the bits from that car. In fact, the brake booster, the modulator, came out of the green car, ended up in the blue car. So, you know, it saved me more every year. Bits keep coming out of that green car. It lives on. Well, that's kind of, and then, so how did the two-door fetish start? Well, I'm blaming my dad for that. So my dad my brother had a Range Rover before me. He didn't have it for very long. He couldn't afford the fuel. He needed a car. I found him a really nice, low-pressure Saab 9000. Turbo, obviously. Petrol. And I got it for him, and he drove it. He said, wow, this is quick. And it was quick. It was Starship Enterprise quick. Millennium Falcon, when they go to the hyperdrive, and the stars suddenly go into stripes and come towards you again. It was like that. It was quick. Really, really, yeah, epic, quick car. And it was dirt cheap. Less than £1,000. So I said, here's a car for you, brother. Have this. So I went away on holiday weeks after we handed it all over and everything. Got back from the holiday. Now he's traded it in and bought a Range Rover 3.9 Vogue. Sorry, where the fuck did that come from? This is before I bought my first one. Sorry, but where the fuck did that come from? I wanted one, he said. I've lost where I was. Oh no. Dad, two-door Range Rovers. So, my mum, unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago now, but she had a particularly nasty cancer, and yeah, it wasn't great fun. But when we got through the other end of it all, my dad kind of always, when my mum was around, he'd always wanted a two-door Range Rover. Loved them. And I must admit, I did too. But I never really considered them, because why would you want to drive a car that old as a daily driver? I needed a daily driver. But I'm now driving a 28-year-old Range Rover Classic as my daily driver. So perhaps I could have done back, in the years gone by. But my hands are a little bit more gnarly now. My brain is a little bit wiser. But he wanted a two-door Range Rover. And after my mum passed on, we said, right, okay, let's go and let's sort this fetish, let's scratch this itch. We're going to find a two-door Range Rover. Of course, the prices started to creep by then. So rather than picking up a two-door wreck for 200 quid, scrap price, or a half-decent car for 10 grand, all of a sudden they were going at 20, 30,000 pounds. So we were looking at these cars, and as we were looking at them, he said, do you want to haggle? And no, they didn't want to haggle because the price had gone up another 5,000 pounds. So they wanted to haggle with us, the sellers. Oh, this is getting a bit silly, this is. So my dad found a right-hand drive, two-door Range Rover, the car he's got right now, oddly enough, there's a spoiler for you, in a car trader in Belgium. I think it was Classic Car Barn. Insert here. So Dad phoned him up. And the chap says, oh no, not another one about this two-door Range Rover. And Dad said, look, I'm really keen to buy, can you give me a price? He said, well, actually, no, come and look at it and then we'll talk. He said, I've had so many people on the phone to me saying, what's your best price? Blah, 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 blah. 20,000 euros it was. So Dad phoned me up and said, great, book the Eurostar. We'll go over there. We'll go and have a look at it. I said, laugh at it. Why not? I live near Amersham, so we can get the Metropolitan line straight into King's Cross, walk across St Pancras, get the Eurostar down, which is exactly what we did. Got all the way there. He picked us up in a really, really nice 1982 5 Series BMW. Beautiful it was, really nice. We get to this barn, and there must have been about 300 cars in there. It was incredible. It's like a car museum. And most of the stuff in there he was selling on commission. So the owners still owned the car, and he looked after them and marketed them on their behalf, and then took a slice of the sale price. So we looked at the car. He drove us, because we had no insurance to drive overseas. Drove us. When we got back to the yard, I drove it around the yard. Nice. It was together. And I knew a fair bit about Range Rovers by this point, so I was looking around. It had a tiny restoration. It was nice. So yeah, we looked at this car. I did say to my dad, because my dad was like, should I buy it? And I did say to him, if you don't buy it, I'm going to buy it. Because it was, as you've seen, his Range Rover is really actually very nice. It's okay, it's suffering a little bit now because it's been in the North Devon. It's seen 5 or 6 North Devon winters now. So it needs a bit of love and care and attention. It's not cosseted like my Stag is, which is stuck and lives in a garage normally. It lives outside. So anyway, so we signed the deal. The idea was for the car to be delivered back to the UK. And then we took the train back to the Eurostar terminal in Brussels. I said to Dad, right, we need to have a beer or 7. So there's a bar just over the road from the station, and I'm gonna sign off with this kind of little bit, because otherwise we're going to drag on too long tonight. And I said to Dad, right, okay, we need to go into the bar and ask them if they've got any carling. Just my silly sense of humour. So, yeah, do you know anyone that serves carling round here? No, we've only got Stella Artois. And if you absolutely must, you can have the sea sans sauce on Gatra, the Kronenberg. Anyway, we sat there and we drank our own body volume in bloody Stella. And then got back on the Eurostar and slept all the way home. But that was kind of like how I got into Two Doors then. It's a laugh though, isn't it? I don't know, is it? Am I just a complete lunatic? It's only life, it's only money, you can't take it with you. Pretty lucky, you know, doing a job I love. And it's got to that point in my life, really, I guess, that lads have all grown up, though they're not flown the nest, they're all magpies. Cuckoos? No, not cuckoos, magpies. Or is it cuckoos? I don't know. I'm rambling now. Not swallows, certainly. Anyway, I do a job I love. And I like to share my trials and tribulations with you. And that's really what this channel's about. I kind of use it a little bit as a promotional vehicle for the business, my business. But it's more of an information channel on how to do shit. There's an element of comedy involved in it. There's an element of beer involved in it. And I think that's kind of, for me, that's a healthy mix. I don't drink while I'm working on cars normally. I try not to drink before 6 o'clock, but it's Friday night and it's now 20 past 6. So there you go. I've been drinking since about 5:30. Sorry. What the fuck? Anyway, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video of my banal ramblings. And if you feel inspired to buy me a pint, and the pint may well be spent on an external microphone, but I will never be short of pints, then use the link down in the description. Get my head underneath there, down in the description. It's down there somewhere. And if you want to contact me for work or for queries, or just to say you're an oaf, Church House Classics, it's all one word, @gmail.com. I also have a website, churchhouseclassics.co.uk. The business is called Church House Classics, I don't know if you guessed. Now at the moment I'm a little bit homeless as far as the business is concerned. I can't go to my home because of Kung Flu, so I'm staying with my dad, because this is where I was when it all got locked down, and I've got to protect him. Anyway, fucking rambling now. Cheers and good night.